Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for Minnesota Matters. I'm Tess Rice. I'm MBA's General Counsel. I am joined by Tom Boswell-Healy, our Associate Counsel and Compliance Consultant, and Teresa Kubas, our Senior Government Relations Manager. Carrie is no longer with the MBA, FYI. So it's just the three of us. So today, Teresa's going to talk about some political election issues, I guess. There's a lot going on. And then Tom and I are going to talk about the impact of death on bank accounts. If you have any questions for us on that, we do get a lot of questions about that. Please just put them in the chat and we will try to answer those for you. And this will be recorded and put on our YouTube page. I wanted to start off though real quick with a litigation update. So you may recall that MBA filed an amicus brief on a case at the State Court of Appeals on behalf of Star Bank. Star Bank was sued by a grain elevator. So we filed an amicus brief on their behalf, and they did win that case recently, which was really exciting. It was a great decision for the bank, but also a great decision for the banking industry. So we're really excited about that one. For our lawsuit against the FDIC, we filed our appeal on July 25th. So we lost at the district court level on a technical issue, and our board decided to go ahead and appeal that decision. And so we filed our brief on July 25th. And then a week later, we had 3 different groups file amicus briefs or friend of the court briefs on our behalf. So ABA filed a brief on the Administrative Procedures Act and how the FDIC did not follow that. Missouri Bankers Association, along with all the other banking associations in the 8th Circuit, filed a brief focusing on UDAP and how the FDIC does not have authority to create new rules about UDAP. And then Shazam, they filed a separate brief on the compliance issues, how the FDIC does not have authority to change disclosures for Reg DD and Reg E issues. So we're really excited about all 3 of those briefs. They were all really well written, and the FDIC was supposed to respond to our brief within 30 days, but they have asked for an extension. They said based on those 3 amicus briefs, they need time to digest the information in those. So we expect them to reply by September 28th, and then we will have a chance to file a brief after that, responding to what they've said. So that's the update on that. Teresa?
Perfect. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Not a whole lot going on in the political world in Minnesota. Just kidding. Normally I come in and kind of talk about some of the legislative issues that we're dealing with at the Capitol, but election year, we are turning our attention to elections. Next week in Minnesota on August 13th is the primaries. I'll get into that a little bit, but obviously the biggest news right now is the presidential race. And I don't think we've oftentimes spoken on Minnesota Matters, or really kind of in general on kind of political races, on the presidential race. This year, obviously, very different. Governor Walz being tapped for running mate with Kamala Harris has just kind of shocked everyone. Nobody really kind of looked at him as kind of that person to be chosen. Minnesota really isn't a battleground state when it comes to the presidential election. It's been decades since a Republican has won in Minnesota to win the Electoral College votes in Minnesota. So again, when everything kind of transpired in the last couple of weeks, just kind of watching how Governor Walz has elevated from, very Minnesotan governor to now running mate for the current Vice President Harris, it just kind of shocked everyone. The NBA has worked with, in general, we met Walz back in 2007 when he won his congressional seat, beating Gil Gutnick down in the 1st congressional district back in 2006. So he was obviously in Congress for all those years, and then as governor. So we will continue to watch that. We obviously look at it, there's Governor Walz running for vice president with Kamala Harris, but it's also kind of the trickle down. And that's kind of where we kind of look as to kind of really the impact on Minnesota and how that really kind of impacts not only the election, but what does it mean if they win in November? That would obviously mean that Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan would become governor, and then it would mean that Bobby Joe Champion, who is the Senate president, would be elevated to lieutenant governor. But then that kind of gets into kind of the primary next week and kind of what's on tap in Minnesota when it comes to the primaries. I'm going to have Renee put into the chat a couple links. There's going to be 2 links in there. One to let you know what's your sample ballot for your races in your area. Everybody, regardless of where you live, you will have at least the U.S. Senate on there, because there are candidates on both sides. I think there's probably 8 on each running. Klobuchar is obviously, our sitting senator, but she has a lot of people that also throw their names on the ballot. And so Tuesday is when kind of they whittle that down to 1. With primary votes, you must stay on one side of the ballot. So either you vote all Republican or all Democratic. You can't cross ballot, whereas in November you can actually cross over and vote for whomever you want in any races. That link to what's on your sample ballot, Renee dropped in there. And then the other one that I had her drop in was from NPR. NPR actually did a rundown of which races are in the primary, and then had some question and answers for the various people. So that kind of also gives you kind of just some kind of background on who's running. The Minnesota Senate is not up for election this year. If you recall, they left session last year with a 34-33 Democratic majority. Since that time, right after session ended, when the filing period was open, Kelly Morrison in the Orono, Minnetonka area decided to run for Dean Phillips' seat. Dean Phillips was obviously running last year for president against Biden. And when he did that, he decided that he wasn't going to run again for Congress. So when he decided not to run, Kelly Morrison, who was a sitting DFLer, in the Senate, decided to run for his seat. And so she resigned her seat. In June, so that seat would be on the general election. So the fact that that could be on the general election instead of so it's a special election, but during the general election, there is one Republican running for that. So there's not a primary on that side, but there are 3 Democrats running for that special election. So that will determine again the majority. So right now we are sitting at a 33-33 majority. So that is what's happening with the Senate. There will be a lot of money spent in that, because that will determine the majority. As for the House, the Minnesota House, the current makeup is 70-64 DFL control. There are 19 primaries some of them are Republican versus Republican, like just Republican side. Some are Democrats, some are both. Really depends on your area. So really take a look at those. And then we'll get into a whole lot more kind of this fall, what the elections look like for November. Because again, in Minnesota, we have had one party control for the last 2 years, and having some kind of change. Having some kind of divided government would be definitely great for the state, just so that we have more thoughtful conversations. Because I think that's one of the things that we feel that was lacking this last session, was that it took a lot of work to get everybody to kind of hear both sides. But the one thing, obviously, Minnesota being in the national spotlight will definitely, with Walz being on that presidential ticket, will really make Minnesota and the policies from the last 2 years. It will spotlight what's been going on in Minnesota. It will spotlight again what happened during 2020, during COVID, during the riots in Minneapolis. There'll be a lot of talk about the budget spending. On both sides, everybody will talk about the investments and the positives of our governor, and then there will be a lot of people that will look and kind of talk about the negatives. I cannot predict what's going to happen in November, but it's going to be interesting. And we're under 90 days to that election date, and so we'll just continue to watch, because every day, Trump was up for a little bit, and now Harris is definitely polling wise has kind of started to move up, and they still have their convention, which is crazy to sit there and think it's just the focus on Biden to Harris to Walz, that the the party has really kind of captivated the media attention. And so the polling numbers will definitely favor her for quite some time until we see possibly more debates. And hopefully there'll be a good conversation about policies and the future for the country, and less personalities. So again, you can vote by going into your city council or doing your early voting right now. Otherwise, the voting will be done on the 13th, and I will send out a political insight probably about the 20th of August after I get back into the country because I'm on vacation. So thank you, everybody, and I'll pass back over to Tess.
Teresa, could you just talk about a little, when I pulled up my sample ballot, there were so many people running against Senator Klobuchar. Who's the front runner in that race?
Well, so Senator Klobuchar is obviously going to be the front runner in her
Oh,
race.
yeah. But
I
I mean,
don't think
for the
obviously,
Republicans,
and
there
I
were
don't think,
so
but
many.
you know, and if you look at that, if you look at the other side, the Republican side, there's, you know, there's those that get the endorsement. So Senator Klobuchar obviously got the DFL endorsement. And so other people will just throw their names on there. So she's obviously got the name ID. For the Republicans, that's definitely going to be one that Royce White got the GOP endorsement, but Joe Frazier is kind of another one. So it's really on the Republican side, it's really going to be Joe Frazier and Royce White. Obviously, the other one that's going to be really highlighted is the Ilhan Omar one in Minneapolis with Don Samuels running against her again in Minneapolis in that CD5 area. But otherwise, for the rest of the state, actually Fishbach up in the 7th Congressional District, she did not get endorsed this year. So she does have somebody running against her, which not having the endorsement is never great, but I think she's done really well with kind of her canvassing of the district. And I think Boyd, who's running against her, might get a lot of votes in their area. But again, I think it's, you know, kind of the top ones, Republicans, it would be Royce White or Joe Frazier on the Republican side, and Klobuchar will have no problem, I think. But then some of those congressional ones, people just, you know, throw their names in there because they can.
Like Oli Savior? Yeah. Okay.
Oli's on there every year. There's others that are just kind of the repeats, so.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. We're going to move on to death and bank accounts and loans. I think we get so many questions about this because hopefully bankers don't have to deal with this so often that they become experts. So Tom and I are going to start kind of generally speaking. Let's just start on the bank account side. We have this covered in our MBA deposit accounts manual in chapter 19. There's a chapter called Effective Death and Incompetency on Deposits. And then chapter 6 of our safe deposit manual also covers deceased renters. And there's a really good flow chart in there to help you deal with those situations because it's pretty complicated on the safe deposit side. So let's say, Tom, an individual account. That's our easiest scenario, right? So
Right, yeah, the individual accounts shouldn't be too much trouble.
who's going to get the money?
Right, that's going to go to well, it depends. You've got if they have a will, they're governed by a will or anything like that, so they'll all the gifts will be granted to the will. Otherwise, you have intestate, which is where there's no will. Oftentimes, the individuals getting the proceeds there are going to be similar, but they don't have to be the same, because you can elect to choose and choose who you're going to gift your bank account to. But so if there's not a will, that kind of happens a lot. The thing they see most often is people come in with a small estate affidavit. So when you get that, clearly by the name, small estate, it has to be below a certain amount, which is currently $75,000. I can't exceed that, so it can be 75, but not in excess of that.
Does the bank have to decide how much money a person has in their estate?
They do not. That's part of what the person claiming the bank account has to affirmatively state in their affidavit. So they have to certify in the affidavit that the estate is no more than 75,000. They also have to certify that 30 days have passed since the person has died.
What if they have more money than that in the bank, though, for example?
I'm sorry?
Well, let's say that affidavit comes in, but you know that person has 3 accounts and they have $80,000.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess the then, you know, the affidavit wouldn't be effective in that case then with the, because they're certifying to something that you know is incorrect.
Right, so if you're aware of it, that's the issue. So it's not something you have to police. You don't have to go
Yeah.
looking around for their assets, but if you
Yeah.
know that they have more money than that, then that use of that form is not appropriate. And they're
Mhm.
gonna have to go through probate.
And it's the entire estate. It's not just what the bank holds.
Mhm.
So if you know that they own a home free and clear, you know, maybe they just paid off the loan at the bank and, you know, they own a home and it's worth more than $75,000, that would take them out as well.
Yeah, but you don't need to go fact finding or
Yep,
anything.
you don't need to
like that.
search for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's whether you know it already or not. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So when you were talking about a will, of course, they can't come in and just bring a will in and say, hey, look,
Right.
they gave me this bank account.
Right. If they have a will, then they're going to court. They get the personal representative appointed or something similar. And then the personal rep will come in and deal with the bank account, and you'll get those letters testamentary and things like that from the court documents.
Yeah, so you're not gonna deal with the person who says I'm personal rep in this will. You're gonna deal with someone who's got the court papers.
Right. Right. Yeah.
They
If
have
they
to
come in
jump
with
through
just a
that
will,
hoop.
then you can direct them to, you know, seek counsel. Right.
Yeah,
That's another
Yeah.
thing too. You know, if they're asking you what they should be doing with their funds and you know how to handle it, that's not really something the bank should do. You should, you know, tell them to seek out their own counsel to determine what's appropriate to handle the estate. That's not the banker's job to tell them, you know, do the estate planning for them or offer legal advice, certainly.
so people who can use the small estate affidavit would be someone who would be named in a will already,
Yeah.
or someone who would be an heir by
Right.
statute, so a family member. They could use it, but also the state could use it to get back Medicaid is the usual, right?
Right.
And then
Yep.
you have funeral homes as well, can use that form to
Right.
collect on accounts.
Yeah, those are the big ones when you're doing that small estate affidavit. The big thing, it's not meant for creditors. So if somebody, you know, owes a debt when they die, then that creditor can't come in and use the small estate to collect the bank account. But yeah, the states, the county, funeral homes that provided funeral and burial services can come in and collect funds, do that
Yeah, we were just
process.
talking the other day about a bank that got both. They heard
Right.
from the county, but they also heard from a funeral home. And weren't you saying, Tom, that the funeral home probably has precedence?
Yes, for what I could tell on the statute, it looked like that the order of precedence, you know, that when they're both coming in, that the funeral home has precedence to those funds over a medical assistance claim. And I think that's just to make sure that the funeral and cemetery needs are met first, and then we'll go after other issues. Because you know, if the funeral home doesn't handle it, then the county will have to handle it anyway, so they'll be paying either way.
Yeah, that makes sense. So joint accounts, those are easier, right? The person that's the other owner of the
Yes.
account would probably just get the money, but what again if the county comes calling or the funeral home?
You know, again, they still have precedence. It's at the time of death is where they look at. So, you know, that if the owner who had died, you know, all the other proceeds will go to the joint owner, but the funeral home or the county or state could still claim funds that were in there at the time of death. So that's still up for grabs for those parties, and not just automatically go to the joint owner. So you still have to, you know, accept those and process those. And you know, if you process taking a small estate affidavit or any of those claims, it does release the bank from liability as long as you process it. You know, if you refuse to take it and everything's correct on there, then you could open yourself up to liability from the successor who's claiming the funds.
Yeah, so I think they're usually going to try to look at who contributed the money, right? So there would be an
Yes.
opportunity probably for that joint owner to say, hey, this was all my money and now you're coming after it. I'm the one who put this all in here. So I think they do have some opportunity, but that's not something the bank has to,
Right, that's not the
deal
bank's
with.
responsibility. There, certainly if somebody was added just as a matter of convenience to transact business for another, but they never actually contributed anything to the bank account, the joint owner could certainly make those claims to them, but they'd have to make that, that would cut around the bank. That would not be your responsibility to handle that sort of issue.
yeah. On a POD account, we've got our named beneficiaries on there, and so beneficiaries are gonna come in with, they're gonna need a certified death certificate.
Right.
You're gonna need some kind of proof. So there's a little bit of waiting there, but beyond that, there is, a bank asked me recently if there was a 30-day waiting period on that. I'm not aware of any waiting
Yeah,
period.
yeah, there's no waiting period, just verifying that the person's actually deceased, and then you want to verify the POD. If you a lot of banks don't have full information on their POD beneficiaries other than just a name. So you want to verify that that individual is the correct person. But absent that, funds go right over.
Do you recommend that a bank be proactive on reaching out to the POD beneficiaries? Because I've heard of banks that have just kind of waited, but they don't come because they don't know about the money.
Yes, yeah, I think they should be proactive. Just it makes it a little more difficult if you don't have any contact information or full information on the POD and from beneficiary themselves. So, but if you can find information, if you're a smaller local bank, you may know the family, and it may be easier to track down who that individual is. But some of the larger banks, if you just have a name, it makes it really difficult. Depending on the name, John Smith.
Mhm.
And you have no other information, they may not still live in the States, let alone the town. So it makes it hard. But if you can identify that individual and contact them, I think that would be best. You don't want to have
And that's
these
why it's a
kind of
good
ghost
idea to,
accounts hanging out there.
that's why you want to get some information on the POD beneficiary when they open the account, and get more than a name if you can, get an address, a phone number, make it easier for yourself later on, hopefully. But because if you can't find them, I assume it's just gonna sheet to the state.
Right, you're just going to have to hold it for the term of years, 3 years usually in a checking account. So, and then sheet it to the state in the name of the beneficiary. And and it's obviously the beneficiary themselves died before that, then they don't have an ownership interest if they died before the account holder.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, the statutes deal with issues with those beneficiaries. And if they, let's say, die at the same time, or in what order, the statutes are pretty helpful in figuring that out. So if that happens, give us a call and we'd be happy to go through that with you. Same issues on POD accounts with the state or a county or a funeral home. They're going to take precedence over that POD beneficiary.
Right.
So if you get any kind of notice, you're not going to pay out. So even if it's not the small estate affidavit yet, if you know that there's going to be a claim, because they usually send a letter in advance, you're not going to pay out.
They usually give you notice. They say, "One's coming."
Yeah.
So,
Hold this money. So of course we do. So we get a lot of questions too about business accounts. A sole proprietorship account, is really in Minnesota just a individual account, because it's not the sole proprietorship isn't really a separate legal business. So I think you're going to treat that just like you would treat an individual account.
Right, it would be just the same, and it doesn't matter if they have, sole proprietors could get a certification of assumed name that they file with Secretary of State, but that doesn't make them an entity necessarily. It just allows them to use a trade name that's different than their full legal name or a portion of their legal name. So that doesn't make them an entity. It's still leave them as an individual.
Yeah.
So they could have a POD.
Right.
They could have a POD beneficiary on those accounts. But if you have any other type of entity account, partnership or LLC, corporation, those continue on past the death of any one person. So a POD of beneficiary would be appropriate to have on those accounts.
So, it's good planning for a small business if they have a sole proprietorship to, a lot of times it's spouses working together. So maybe one spouse is the owner of that account, but the other one is an authorized signer and a POD beneficiary. And that can make things smoother if one of them passes away, or if the owner passes away.
Yeah.
Um,
And you,
but with an LLC, let's start with a single member LLC. You've got one owner, and that person passed away.
yeah.
We get a lot of questions about that. Can the spouse come in and get the money?
Yeah, yeah. But only if they've been designated, they have to be designated in some manner. So, if they had, I think if you had a person before the sole member of the LLC, if they came in and authorized other people to transact business on the account in addition to them, the bank verified that, I think that would be just fine for those persons to continue after the death, because that's a formal appointment. But if no one else is authorized to transact business on the account, then you really just have to wait. The LLC will go into the estate, and you have to wait for the court to come in and appoint somebody to transact business on that. Or if they could potentially sell, I suppose, as well, and they could do that. But again, there'd be some sort of court or other form that would designate that transfer of ownership.
Yeah, and so it's good estate planning if they think about that when they're filling out their resolutions for that company, or even in the LLC management documents. Same with bylaws of a corporation and their resolutions. If it's a small business with a single owner, they really need to think about what they're going to do. They should think about it, because if they don't, it's difficult for their families, but it's also really difficult for the bank. You've got to wait until someone comes in who's authorized. The business doesn't die. The business is going on as usual, but if there's no one that's been authorized and the documents don't allow someone to authorize anyone but that deceased person to authorize someone to sign, then they've got to go through the court process, which is, difficult and expensive.
Yeah, but it can be lengthy if they're an ongoing enterprise. They've got bills that they have to pay, or it's utilities and things like that, or insurance, whatever it may be. That somebody needs to be available to write the check.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's a question in the chat about flow charts for these different situations. I did mention the safe deposit one. Safe deposit's more difficult because there's different things people can do, interested persons can do. Let's say you have a sole owner of a box, sole renter, let's say, of a box, and they pass away. There's an ability to go in and do a will search. So there is a way to get into that box. And so there is flow charts in there for those situations. I don't know that I don't think there are any in the deposit manual that go through the different situations.
Yeah, I don't think on the death one we have some other ones for like garnishments and levies where there's flow charts in there, but I don't recall the specific ones dealing with death. I think it's more in the
That's something we'll look at
text.
though. Yeah.
It's
we
not
have
a bad
another
idea.
question. It says, do you have to be an officer of the business in order to continue operating it, or can they be an authorized signer only and still continue to operate the business?
Well, I would think just for the bank account,
Yeah.
if they've previously authorized, I think that's just fine. Now, for the other operations of the business that's outside the bank, that may be a different question. But I think just for the bank's purposes, if somebody was previously authorized to write checks on the account, can they do so after the sole member dies? I think that's yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry to backtrack here, but I just wanted to mention we were going to talk a little about reclamation of Social Security payments that come into individual accounts or joint accounts, POD accounts. We do get questions about that. I think the last one I had was, we were talking about the day, let's say someone dies in the middle of the month and they've already received their Social Security payment. Social Security Administration can reclaim that payment, even though they were alive at the time the payment was made. If they die in that same month, the Social Security, the Treasury will take it back. So you don't want to pay that out. You're not going to want to let a POD beneficiary have Social Security funds that are going to be reclaimed. So you got to be careful with that, because the bank's going to be on the hook for that.
Right. Yeah. So you have the the bank is kind of default fully liable for those payments. So there's some ways you can limit the liability somewhat as well. But one of them is as soon as you know that there's been a death, and that any payments you receive after that, to return those payments. But
We get
if you haven't received that D&E notice yet, but you find out that somebody's passed away, you could return the payments before you even get the D&E, and then you have the two separate return codes that they have. They have one that's specific for a representative payee situation, so you can return in that case. Otherwise, if it's just the beneficiary that's receiving the payment, there's a different code for that.
Yeah, so it's a good idea to, when someone passes away, make sure they don't have Social Security funds in there before you pay it out. We did want to mention the loan side as well, too. You know, if you've got a, we'll start with an unsecured consumer loan, and the borrower passes away. There's obviously no collateral to go against. I mean, you can set off if you have that language in your note allowing you to accelerate the debt upon the death of the borrower, then you could set off against any deposit accounts they have in the same name. So that's an option. Otherwise, you know, you're gonna have to make a claim against the estate. And I think you do that, you file on some type of notice with the probate court. It's usually the court of the county where the person passed away. So that's one thing you could do with a loan like that. Obviously, if you have a secured loan, you're going to try to get your collateral. So either, you know, a foreclosure situation or a repossession situation, and then you have to look at, I suppose, the statute on whether, what's that one called, Tom? 325G.22. It's the one where if the loan is small, you can't do both.
Oh.
You can't take the collateral and
yeah, go after a judgment.
right. Yeah.
You gotta choose one or the other. And if the loan is just in the individual's name, it doesn't automatically transfer to any family members. But more often in a collateralized situation, if they do want to assume a loan, then you're obligated to do them let them, as long as they continue to make payments on time and things like that. And be the normal
Are you
process.
talking about real estate, consumer real estate? Or are you talking about, let's say,
Well, yeah, kind of. Yeah, if it's an individual, just any loan. I mean, I assume no one would want to accept, assume the unsecured loan, but they might have, if it's collateralized, they might want to use the vehicle or whatever it is, continue to use it, so then they could assume the loan.
or you would
the
just
deceased individual.
redo the loan, right? You could,
Yeah, you'd probably redo it.
yeah, that's what I would do. But on the mortgage side, we've had some issues in our state legislature, because sometimes banks are unaware that when the owner of a home dies and they had a mortgage, the family members do have the legal right to continue to make those payments, and you can't foreclose on them. They have the right to assume that loan. So that's a federal law called the Garden St. Germain Act, but it's also codified in RESPA. In RESPA, it only applies to large servicers, but the federal law applies to everybody. So if you have a mortgage, if they're going to continue to make those payments, they can assume that. And obviously, if they don't make payments, you can foreclose, but no one wants to do that. That's something I think some people are not familiar with.
Yeah,
Think of anything else
yeah.
on the loan side?
On the loan side, that's what I had one thing on the loans. Oh, one thing I get questions about too is that in the interim, while the estate is being in more complex estates, where the estate is being closed up and finalized, the estate may hang out there for years, possibly, and whether or not you can lend to estates. And estates are entities themselves, So you could lend to an estate. It should be a shorter term loan, obviously, because they're meant to be wrapped up in a timely fashion. But it's kind of an interim process. You can lend to estates, and you see that a lot especially in family farm in situations where they have a lot of family members that have an interest in the farm, but they have not had it placed into any sort of entity itself. So it's just in the parent's name, perhaps, and so they have a large amount of ag land, and it gets quite complex, the probate process, and continue to have the agriculture enterprise going. So it's possible to have lend to the estate as if they were continuing that agricultural enterprise, doing the normal operating line of credit, that sort of stuff.
We have a question about ACHs. He's asking if it's the same for investment funds. We've got an auto ACH, let's say. He's asking if a broker would be able to reclaim the last transfer. Would the bank be responsible? I don't think so. I mean, the Treasury is all powerful, and
Right.
that's why they can do reclamation, but I don't think there's any law that would allow.
Nothing. I mean, I think they could certainly put in a notice to request the funds be returned, but I think you would treat that with as any other, if the funds were still there and you didn't have any indicators showing that there was any fraud or anything going on, then you could return the funds if you wish to, but I don't think there's an obligation to in that. Certainly not I can't think of any law or regulation that would cover that situation specifically.
Yeah, but let's talk about ACH in general, because I meant to talk about that and then I forgot. So first of all, with checks, if you know someone's passed away, I think the rule of thumb is 10 days that you might let things go through that they wrote. But what about when it comes to ACH, Tom?
Yeah, the ACH, I mean, if you know about the death, you can return those right away, and send the death notice. I think you still have the same leeway. I don't remember the time frame though, but I think you still have a similar leeway of letting things go through. But you can. There's a return code for deceased account holder, so you could return those.
What do you
as
do?
well.
Let's say if it's let's say utility bills or something like that that's coming through ACH, and a family member wants those to continue to be paid. Because maybe they're assuming that mortgage.
Yeah. And I think a lot of banks do accommodate that, let those payments go through, especially because in these situations of death, it does take some time. You can't switch things over immediately unless it's already been addressed up front. But if it's somebody hasn't planned, or it's a situation, tragic situation, then things come up about all of a sudden. And then you have to, maybe account for more leeway to do these things. But I think it's pretty common for bankers, if they know, if they have information that the situation is going to continue or change a certain way, that they'll accommodate continuing payments for a time. I mean, not indefinitely, but for a time to get things switched over to whoever's going to be the new owner or borrower, whatever the situation may be.
Yeah, because that could be really critical. I mean, with a Spotify account, you could go ahead and cancel that. That's
Right.
not, but if you have your heat, I mean, someone's pipes could freeze and their home could be damaged horribly. So, I mean, I guess you got to look at the different types of payments. Some obviously are very important and some are not at all important anymore. So,
Right. Yep. Yeah, a subscription service to the newspaper or something, could probably return that one.
yeah, things that aren't so important. Okay, well, do you have anything else, Tom? I think we're out of questions.
No, it's just one thing that did what I mentioned, if I could scroll down to it, I had just excuse me, just a question that was related to as a corporation. So this one I think happened to be the sole owner of the corporation died, but there we go. Gotta find my right. There's a a form that's called an assignment separate from certificate. That's common in situations of where a sole or primary shareholder dies. You can fill out that certificate, file it with the court, and what that does is changes the ownership. It leaves everything else kind of in place, the articles of incorporation, bylaws, all that stuff. So it would function the same. It just replaces one person for another in the ownership position. So if you come across one of those, it is a acceptable form to use to change the ownership structure from one person to another.
What did you call that form, Tom?
It was the assignment separate from certificate.
Oh, that's catchy.
So,
So yeah,
yes.
so you wouldn't need to change anything with the bank account. You're gonna get a new resolution, probably.
Yes, you get your new resolution, but other than that,
They could keep
yeah,
that
because
same
the
account
entity
going.
stays, entity's still there, so you'd want to update that resolution with whatever the changes are. But all this does is just confirm that person A has been replaced by person B.
Yeah.
So,
Is that the remaining issue that you had, Tom?
yeah, that was the last one I was gonna think of. Yeah. The only
Okay,
other thing, if you have savings bonds questions, Treasury has some good Q&As about the death of savings bond owners, so maybe I'll put the Treasury Direct link in there.
okay, great. So yeah, remember, we're here to answer these questions, legal@minbankers.com, or you can give us a call. And we'd be happy to try and help. We can't give legal advice, but we might be able to provide the law that will guide you, or at least help you with some information that you can provide to the bank's attorney. Okay, the link got in there. Okay.
Yep,
Great.
carried my bullet over, so that's.
Okay, good. Thank you for doing that. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time. And I hope you have a great day.
Yep.
Bye.